The dusty bell above the shop door chimed, signaling yet another slow afternoon in Max's small barbershop. It was tucked away on the quiet side of town, where streets lined with uneven cobblestone told tales of lives lived just a little harder, and where most of the customers shuffled in not out of luxury, but out of necessity. Max had been here for over 20 years, ever since his father had handed him the keys and told him it was his turn to carry on the family business. Day by day he clipped, buzzed, and snipped, chatting with regulars, and listening to the same small-town gossip. This particular Tuesday had been slow. Max was halfway through sweeping up a modest pile of graying clippings when he saw the boy, barely out of his teens, peering hesitantly through the shop's window. Max had noticed him a few times, always lingering, as though the threshold of the shop was too high for him to cross. Today the boy was more disheveled than ever, with wild curls poking out from under a threadbare hood. He wore a jacket too big for his frame and shoes scuffed to the point of no return. Max could see the indecision written plainly across his face. The boy's gaze darted from his own reflection to the row of neatly arranged clippers, scissors, and combs hanging on the walls inside. Finally, the young man pushed open the door, causing the bell to chime again, and shuffled in, his eyes cast down as he shuffled up to Max. Can I get a cut?" he murmured, barely above a whisper. Max took in the boy's worn face and hesitant stance. There was a look of shame mixed with hope in his eyes that tugged at Max's heart. He didn't need to ask about the boy's circumstances, he could read them as easily as he read the fine print on his daily newspaper. For a moment, Max's mind flashed back to his own youth, to the days when he too had been forced to swallow his pride and ask for help from strangers. That memory alone made the decision for him. "Take a seat," Max said gently, nodding toward the worn, black leather chair by the mirror. He held up a hand as the boy reached for his pocket. "No need for that. Today's on the house." The boy froze, looking up in surprise, a cautious smile spreading across his face. He hesitated for a moment before he climbed into the chair, his shoulders easing in relief. As Max carefully laid a cape over him and brushed loose hairs from the collar, he saw the boy visibly relax. It was clear he hadn't experienced such simple kindness in a long time. "What's your name?" Max asked, starting to dampen the boy's wild curls with a spray bottle. "Ethan," the boy replied, voice still soft, as though he was afraid of taking up too much space. Max didn't press him, didn't ask about why he was here or what had brought him to this corner of town. Instead, he asked about simpler things: what music he liked, what sports teams he followed, if he had a favorite book. Slowly, Ethan began to open up, his initial shyness melting away under Max's gentle attention. As Max snipped and trimmed, he learned bits and pieces of the boy's life. Ethan was just barely making ends meet, working at odd jobs when he could find them, but work was hard to come by for someone his age with no connections. Most days he spent looking for work or standing in line at the soup kitchen downtown, hoping there'd be a meal left when it was his turn. Max listened with a heavy heart, knowing too well how a young man could feel trapped and invisible in a city that seemed to rush by without a second glance. As he finished up the last few careful snips, Max ran a gentle hand over Ethan's head, brushing away loose hairs. The transformation was remarkable. The once shaggy hair now lay clean and neat, framing his face in a way that made his eyes look brighter, his smile more confident. Ethan grinned as he caught his reflection in the mirror, his eyes alight with a mix of joy and disbelief. "Wow. Thank you," he said, rubbing a hand over his freshly cut hair. Max gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Keep your head up, kid. You never know when life might surprise you." Ethan's smile faded a little, and a flicker of something like longing crossed his face. But he stood, thanked Max again, and walked out with a quick wave, the bell jingling, as he disappeared into the busy street. Max watched him go, hoping his gesture, small as it was, might make a difference to the boy in ways neither of them could yet foresee. Days slipped by, the memory of Ethan's face lingering in the back of Max's mind like a faint melody. The shop resumed its usual rhythm, with its cast of regulars: Mr. Thompson with his thinning hair, young Lisa coming in for her first ever pixie cut, old Mrs. Gutierrez bringing her grandson in for his back-to-school trim. Business was steady but unremarkable, and Max found himself wondering now and then how Ethan was doing, if his luck had changed. Then, on the following Tuesday morning, a sound broke the shop's usual quiet, the low, purring hum of a car engine outside, followed by the soft crunch of gravel as a sleek black Porsche pulled up in front of the shop. It was a car unlike any Max had ever seen on this side of town, its polished chrome glinting in the sun, and tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. Max squinted through the glass, his broom stilled mid-sweep, as the car door opened and a man in a sharp gray suit stepped out. The man surveyed the shop briefly, his gaze calm but sharp, and then stepped inside, causing the bell to chime. He looked out of place here, tall and neatly put together, with a watch that likely cost more than Max's monthly earnings and shoes polished to a high sheen. Max cleared his throat, feeling a little out of his element. "Can I help you?" The man nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I'm looking for Max," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "That's me," Max replied, his tone cautious but polite. The man held out a hand, his grip firm and precise. "Name's Daniel Holt," he said, as though expecting Max to recognize the name. When Max's face remained blank, he went on, "Ethan told me about you." "About the haircut?" Max's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Ethan. He hadn't expected to hear from the boy again, let alone have him send a stranger his way. He wondered what Ethan had told this man, and why it had led him here. "He did," Max said, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Yes, he did," Daniel said, his expression softening for a moment. "Ethan's my nephew. We lost track of each other for a while, but recently we've reconnected. He spoke very highly of you, said you were a kind man." A surge of warmth filled Max's chest, mixed with a hint of surprise. The memory of Ethan's hesitant smile flashed through his mind, and he felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that his small gesture had somehow reached beyond that one moment. Daniel continued, his eyes never leaving Max's. "Ethan said you gave him something he hadn't had in a long time, a sense of dignity. And I'm here because I think you deserve something in return." Max blinked, taken aback. "Oh, I don't need any kind of reward, really. It was just a haircut." The man's face softened into a small smile, a genuine one that softened the edges of his polished demeanor. "Well, perhaps not to you. But to him it was much more. I've come today because I wanted to offer you something that I think could help your business." He gestured toward the sleek car waiting outside. "How about we take a ride?" Max felt a strange thrill run through him, but also a certain wariness. Yet there was something earnest in Daniel's eyes that reassured him. Max wiped his hands on a towel, glanced back at his familiar shop, his sanctuary, filled with memories of his father, of long days spent sharing stories with neighbors, and made his decision. He locked the door behind him, stepping out into the morning light as Daniel opened the car door with a nod, ushering him inside. Max sank into the plush leather seat, feeling a sense of awe at the smooth, silent power of the car as it pulled away from the curb. They drove through streets that grew steadily more polished, the worn brick facades replaced by modern glass buildings. The city felt larger, more daunting, as though he was glimpsing it from a new perspective. As they moved into the heart of downtown, Max was filled with questions but chose to wait, letting the hum of the engine and the sleek scenery lull him into a curious calm. Finally, they arrived at a tall building with shimmering glass walls that seemed to catch the sunlight in ripples. Daniel led him inside, where every surface gleamed and the air was cool with the scent of leather and polished wood. Max glanced around, feeling almost like he'd stepped into a dream. "Please, follow me," Daniel said, his tone respectful yet businesslike. They walked through a series of halls and past several glass doors, until they reached a large office at the end, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Max marveled at the view, his mind whirling with thoughts as he took in the sprawling city beneath him. The scale of everything around him was almost surreal, so far removed from the modest neighborhood he'd spent most of his life in. Daniel gestured for him to sit at a polished oak table where a set of sleek documents and a high-end pen lay waiting. Before we get into the details, Daniel began, leaning back in his chair. Let me explain why you're here. He gave Max an appreciative nod. When Ethan came to us, he was at a breaking point. The past few years hadn't been easy for him. He's dealt with a lot of setbacks, lost opportunities. He didn't tell us about it. He'd always been so independent. But what he did share, and what truly stuck with me, was your kindness. That haircut gave him more than just a change of appearance. It gave him a reason to believe that people still care. You gave him dignity when he felt he had none left. Max felt his cheeks grow warm. He cleared his throat, feeling a bit out of place in the luxurious office setting. I didn't do much, he replied humbly. Sometimes a small gesture can mean the world. But I only did what any decent person would. Daniel shook his head, smiling. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest impact. I wanted to meet you because people like you are rare. He gestured toward the documents in front of him. I'm a partner at an investment firm, and we work with local businesses to help them grow, to reach their full potential. We'd like to invest in your barbershop. Max blinked, not fully grasping the gravity of what Daniel was saying. His modest barbershop? An investment firm? Daniel must have seen the confusion in his eyes, because he leaned forward, a look of earnestness in his gaze. We've done well over the years, but one of the reasons we started this firm was to give back to those who make a difference, no matter how small. My partners and I believe in helping businesses that serve communities, that offer people something more than just a service. Your shop is a place where people feel seen. I know this because Ethan told me. The thought of Ethan opening up about his struggles, telling his uncle about the barbershop, made Max feel an unexpected wave of gratitude. He'd spent years pouring his heart into that little shop, offering folks more than just a trim or a shave. But he'd never imagined someone would notice enough to take action. So what does that mean exactly? Max asked cautiously. He was a barber, not a businessman, and the world of finance and investments was entirely foreign to him. Daniel smiled, picking up one of the documents and sliding it toward him. It means we'd like to help you expand. Imagine your barbershop with new equipment, more comfortable chairs, perhaps even a second location if you're interested. We'll help with everything, from financing to renovations. We'd also set up an apprentice program, where you could take on young people like Ethan, give them a trade, maybe even give them a second chance. Max's heart pounded as he looked down at the papers, the reality of Daniel's words sinking in. A new barbershop? An apprentice program? He could hardly believe his ears. Over the years, he'd often thought of all the young people he saw on the street, wandering aimlessly, looking for purpose. He'd always wished he could do more than offer them a quick haircut. He imagined teaching someone, passing down the skills his father had taught him, giving someone the same sense of belonging and purpose he'd found behind the barber's chair. I don't know, Max murmured, overwhelmed. I've always been content with the way things are. And running an apprentice program, that's a big responsibility. I'm just a barber. Daniel's gaze softened, as though he understood the weight of Max's hesitation. You're more than just a barber, Max. You're a man who changed a life, perhaps without even knowing it. And with our help, you could change many more. You wouldn't have to handle everything on your own. We'd take care of the logistics and administration. All we'd need is your experience and heart. Max let out a slow breath, a mixture of emotions swirling inside him: gratitude, excitement, but also a hint of fear. His father had built that shop with his own hands, a legacy passed down with care and tradition. He'd grown used to the quiet life, to the familiar rhythm of the shop and its regulars. The idea of expanding, of sharing that space with strangers, felt daunting. But at the same time, he couldn't deny a flicker of excitement that came with the possibility of doing more. As if reading his thoughts, Daniel continued, Why don't you think it over? Come visit our other locations, see how the partnership works. We're not here to change what makes your shop special, we're just here to help you amplify it. And if, after that, you still feel it's not for you, There'll be no hard feelings. We believe in your vision, Max, and we'd like to be part of it. Max nodded slowly, his heart still racing. I'll think about it, he replied, his voice steady. He looked Daniel in the eye and added, I want to make sure that, whatever comes of this, it doesn't change what the shop stands for. Daniel smiled, reaching out to shake his hand. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. Take your time, Max. Later that afternoon, back in his shop, Max leaned against the counter, his mind still buzzing from the unexpected turn his day had taken. He looked around, at the familiar, worn-in walls, the steady hum of the old neon open sign, the faded photos of his father and grandfather that adorned the walls. He thought of all the people who'd sat in his chair, all the lives he'd touched in small ways. Just then, the door opened, and in walked Mr. Thompson, one of his regulars, who had been coming in every month for years. Max greeted him with his usual smile, his mind still half occupied with the day's events. So Max, what's on your mind? Mr. Thompson asked as he settled into the chair. You look like a man with a secret. Max chuckled, shrugging as he picked up his clippers. Maybe I am. Let's just say, I had an unexpected visitor today. As he worked on Mr. Thompson's trim, he shared a few details about his meeting with Daniel, without revealing too much. He spoke about the possibility of expansion, the idea of teaching young people. Mr. Thompson, ever the wise old friend, listened intently, nodding along with interest. Sounds like quite an opportunity, Mr. Thompson said, glancing at Max's reflection in the mirror. I always thought you could do more with this place, Max. You've got the heart for it. Max paused, considering his friend's words. Perhaps that was what it all came down to, having the heart to take a leap, to trust that he could make a difference beyond his small corner of the world. The next few days passed in a blur, as Max pondered Daniel's offer. He tried to go about his business as usual, but his mind kept wandering back to that sleek office, the possibilities laid out before him. Finally, after much thought and a few restless nights, he made his decision. He picked up the phone and dialed Daniel's number, his voice steady as he spoke. I'm ready to give it a shot, Max said, a spark of excitement lighting up his words. But we do it my way, with community in mind. Daniel's voice on the other end sounded equally pleased. Absolutely, Max. We wouldn't have it any other way. Within weeks, the shop began to transform. New, comfortable chairs arrived, and a fresh coat of paint brightened the walls. The renovations were modest but thoughtful, keeping the heart of the shop intact while giving it a touch of elegance. Word spread around town about the changes. And soon enough, people were stopping by out of curiosity. Max even hung a small sign in the window: apprentice program starting soon, inquire within. He wondered who would step through his door, who might be looking for a chance just as Ethan had been. One Friday afternoon, as Max was wrapping up a cut for a young boy, the door opened, and in walked a familiar figure. It was Ethan, looking healthier and happier, his face alight with a new confidence. He wore a clean shirt and held a notebook under his arm, his eyes shining with excitement. Hey, Max, he greeted, his voice stronger than the last time they'd spoken. Max broke into a grin, clapping him on the shoulder. Ethan. Good to see you, kid. What brings you back? Ethan glanced around, taking in the updated space with a smile. I heard about the apprentice program, he said, his gaze steady. I wanted to know if you'd consider taking me on as your first one. The request hit Max straight in the heart. He saw in Ethan the same determination, the same hunger for purpose, that he'd once felt himself. Ethan had found his way back, just as he'd hoped he might. It would be my honor, Max replied, his voice filled with pride. Let's get you started. The days that followed were some of the most fulfilling of Max's life. Ethan came in every morning, eager and wide-eyed, ready to absorb everything Max had to teach. Max showed him the basics at first: the right way to hold scissors, the precision needed to use clippers, the balance between strength and gentleness in each stroke. Ethan listened carefully, asking questions, his dedication shining through in every moment. The timid young man who'd first walked into Max's shop had been replaced by someone with a newfound confidence, someone who had discovered his purpose. As weeks turned into months, Ethan's skills grew, and he began cutting hair on his own. He still had a lot to learn, but he had a natural instinct for the craft, something Max recognized and nurtured. The regulars started to notice too. Mrs. Gutierrez, who'd initially been wary of letting a young'un touch her hair, now requested Ethan every time she came in. She even brought him homemade cookies as a thank you for his careful work. In between haircuts, Max taught Ethan the other lessons of the trade lessons his father had passed down to him. He talked about the importance of listening, of offering kindness without expecting anything in return, of understanding that people came into the barbershop not just for a haircut, but sometimes for solace, for companionship, or for a moment of dignity. Max shared stories about the people who'd come through his door over the years, people who'd left a mark on his heart in ways small and big. Ethan listened to each one with respect, as if they were pieces of wisdom that would guide him not just as a barber but as a person. One afternoon, as they swept up hair after closing, Max noticed Ethan's thoughtful silence. "Got something on your mind, kid?" he asked, leaning on his broom. Ethan paused, his gaze fixed on the floor, and then looked up with a smile. "It's just this place has become more than I ever thought it would. I feel like I belong here. I feel like I'm making a difference." Max nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "You are, Ethan. And that's the beauty of this work. We give people a little piece of dignity, something they carry with them even when they leave. Never forget that." Ethan took his words to heart, and in the following months, his passion only grew. With the apprentice program underway, they began taking on other young people from the neighborhood, some of whom had been drifting, uncertain of where to turn. The barbershop became a place of refuge and learning, a steady anchor for those who needed guidance. One bright summer morning, a large, burly man walked into the shop, his face tired and etched with worry. He looked around, shifting uneasily, as though unsure if he belonged. Max approached him with a warm smile. "Welcome. What can we do for you?" The man hesitated, then finally spoke in a gruff voice. I heard you take on apprentices here. My son's been having a rough time. Lost his way, I suppose. I don't know what to do with him anymore." Max listened carefully, recognizing the familiar tone of a parent who loved their child but didn't know how to help. "Bring him by," he replied gently. "We'll find something for him to do here. We'll teach him, same way I learned from my dad." The man's shoulders relaxed and he nodded, his eyes misting as he mumbled his thanks. Max's heart warmed, knowing that, once again, the shop was becoming a beacon for those who needed a fresh start. Ethan had been listening from the back of the shop, and after the man left, he looked at Max with admiration. "You really believe in people, don't you?" Max gave a small chuckle. "It's not hard to believe in people when you remember that everyone's just looking for a little kindness, Ethan. A place to be seen." Years passed, and with each passing season, the barbershop grew. It became a lively, bustling space, filled with laughter, shared stories, and the steady hum of clippers and scissors. Ethan became more than just an apprentice, he became a full partner, sharing in the responsibilities and shaping the future of the shop alongside Max. And through his apprenticeship, others came, young people from every background, each one adding their own story to the legacy of the shop. One crisp autumn afternoon, Daniel returned, stopping by to see how things had unfolded since that first fateful visit. He marveled at the transformation of the place, the new faces bustling around, each one with a story, each one part of the community that Max and Ethan had built. "It's incredible," Max Daniel said, looking around. "You've done more than I ever imagined. This place has become a lifeline for so many." Max looked around, feeling the weight of the journey he and Ethan had taken together. "It's not just me," he replied with a proud glance at Ethan, who was laughing with one of the new apprentices as he swept up clippings. "It's all of us." As they stood in the doorway, watching the quiet, meaningful activity inside, Daniel placed a hand on Max's shoulder. "You know, some people think success is measured by wealth or fame. But this is success in its truest form. You've built a legacy. Max smiled, his heart full. He thought back to that first day when he'd offered Ethan a free haircut, an act so small he'd almost forgotten it. And yet, that single moment had set off a chain of events that had transformed not just Ethan's life, but his own, and the lives of so many others. As the afternoon light filtered in through the shop's windows, Max felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that the shop would continue on, long after he was gone, as a place where people could find not just a haircut, but a place to belong, a place to be seen. And as he watched Ethan chatting and laughing with the apprentices, he knew that the future of the shop, of its mission, was in good hands. Because sometimes all it took was one act of kindness to start something beautiful, a place where people could find a little dignity, a little hope, and just maybe a new beginning.